And Sharynn, before we get started, I wanted to ask, what is the music we are going to be listening to?
It was from his CD called Be My Best Friend,
Okay.
uh, with my best friends with Stanley Turrentine and Ray Brown. There were two. There was another one in Very Good Company.
Cue the music. This is Brandon Dialamonte with the City of Pittsburgh's Office of Special Events. And for this year's Black History Month, we are featuring Pittsburgh jazz legends. So today I'm honored to welcome on Sharynn Harper, the daughter of late jazz pianist Walt Harper. And I don't want to take too much of your time today, Sharynn, so I'll just jump straight into it. We've heard a lot already about what Pittsburgh was like in the 50s and 60s when some of these jazz legends like your father were growing up. But I'm more interested in hearing about what it was like when you were growing up. Were there any trends going on, or was jazz still the same? Was it different? And maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, when I was growing up, it was really an extension of my dad's era, because we all grew up listening to my generation. We all grew up listening to jazz. John Coltrane was very hot. And there was so much jazz in Pittsburgh coming out, and the Crawford Grill was such a big deal for all of us. So we loved it. I was a jazz collector from very early on in my teens. I continued throughout my life when I went to college, etc. So it was a very strong jazz situation going on.
Still, yeah, that's great.
Still, yes.
Yeah.
We were benefiting off of what we had grown up with and grown up listening to with our parents, especially in my situation, because my dad was a musician and played every night, and there was a family affair. Two other brothers were also musicians, so it was all jazz in our home.
Yeah. So
I took it.
Yeah. How did your dad get into music then? I know he had brothers who were also musicians. Is that really what turned him on to it, or was there something else?
I think that was probably first and foremost, but at that time there was so much jazz around. Jazz was very predominant in the culture. It had been up and coming, but now it was really hot. Jazz was hot when he was a young guy. And his older brother, which I mentioned to you before, Ernie, was 6 years older, who was a pianist himself, he played classical as well as jazz. He formed his own group. So with my dad being 12 and Ernie being 18, or dad being 13 and Ernie being 19, that was a big deal to him, because Ernie put together his own group, and he's playing around Pittsburgh, outside of Pittsburgh and DC, and traveling, and my dad is going, this is what I love, So he also took to piano, and he neither of his parents were musicians, which you hear a lot. The parents have been musicians, but they were not. They were business people. And he played piano. He took to it. He studied music at PMI, and that's how he got into it, really through his older brother. Then he had a younger brother, Nate, who was 2 years younger, and he sort of dragged Nate into it. Or, I put it that way, but I'm sure Nate was enthusiastic about getting it himself. He played saxophone, and he was a terrific saxophonist. He played in my dad's group. So it was just music all over the place with us, with the Harpers.
Yeah, that's great. So
when he did get into it after Ernie, he just ran like he's on the racetrack. He had a group in high school, and when he was like 15 or so, and some of the greatest names in jazz were him at that time. Ray Brown, who's one of the greatest bass players of all times, was in his little group. Tommy Turrentine was in his group, brother Stanley.
That's interesting.
A lot of these guys played with him before they left town, but of course he left, but he stayed. He came back.
Yeah, and Ernie, is he the one who went on to play with Art Blakey too, didn't he?
No, my Uncle Ernie had his own group, uh,
Mm.
did very well. Eventually, he did leave and he went to Chicago,
Oh yeah.
and he became a very big deal in Chicago, very big name.
Yeah.
Um, but he didn't have his own group there. He became a solo performer who played at very high end hotels and places like that in Chicago and in the Northwest. Um, he had an early hit, Boogie Woogie Chicago, and
Hmm.
he was just very popular. He was as popular there as my dad had been in Pittsburgh.
Oh, that's great.
And he knew everyone, and all the musicians knew him. And like I said, it was a big family affair. My
Yeah.
dad, my dad, a lot of the guys who were famous knew Ernie from the Chicago scene because Chicago was a very hotbed of jazz at that time, as
Hmm.
you probably know. And it's a small world of jazz musicians, and everybody knows one another. So between my dad playing on the road and between Ernie knowing everyone as well, he was right in there very early on in terms of being at the center of things.
Yeah. And I know you
Yeah.
mentioned Ray Brown and Stanley Turrentine, and I believe you mentioned Errol Garner as well. Was there
Oh
kind of
yeah, he was great friends with Errol Garner. Errol Garner was first and foremost friends with Ernie. You know,
okay?
both pianists out of Pittsburgh around the same age, and Ray Brown and my dad actually used to. They didn't do it a lot, but even Ray remarked about this. They would like take a little time off from school and go over to Errol Garner's house during
Mm.
the day. And I think they should have been in class. I think
Yeah.
they used to call it hooky.
Yeah. Well, I think it
um,
worked out for him. So.
it worked out for them, yeah. And but they were dear friends, very close friends.
So that was my
Grew up.
question: was Errol Garner was it more of a mentor-student relationship, or was that friendship to its core? Really?
I don't think it was a mentor-student relationship. My father was aware of the fact, as everyone wanted to listen to Earl play, that he was such a genius that he was Earl Garner. That is, he was never trying to live up to Earl Garner, even though my
Mhm.
father was a fine pianist. They were just great friends. They were both characters. Joking all the time. They had great personalities, and they really loved each other as friends. So
Yeah.
throughout his lifetime, because we lost Errol rather early,
Hmm.
they were tight buddies.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned the Crawford Grill, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit before we get into your father's places. Do you have any stories about the Crawford Grill? I know your dad played there he was the house band for 10 years or something like that, I believe I read.
Yes, my dad was there. He started playing there very early in his 20s. Um, he already had a reputation around town because he was ambitious, played at all of these small towns around
Hmm.
Pittsburgh, and he had a play on. So when he went into the grill, he had a lot of people follow him there. A well integrated crowd, I should say. Um, and this was in his 20s. All that the owners booked him back in and records. So because of that, he became quote unquote the house pianist. But he was playing other places, and
Hmm.
he had his own group and what have you. But he stayed there for about 10 years, which was really a precedent to uh, the attic, Walt Harper's attic, which was a dream come true. But I love the grill. Now I was an only child, so my father wasn't going to see me running it in and out of the grill at night. But I went
Yeah.
to rehearsals a lot with him. Yeah, I went to rehearsals a lot as a private school kid, as a matter of fact. So,
Mhm.
but I go to the jazz rehearsals with dad. The guys. I love that, hearing them play and setting up what they were going to be playing, that kind of thing. I love the grill that way.
Yeah.
Tremendous, great food.
Yeah.
This is the Crawford Grill number 2.
Right. Yeah. No
Yes.
one's talked about the food yet, so that's good to know. The food was good.
Oh yeah, and yeah, and such a following.
Mhm.
Uh, I think I've been in a lot of clubs in my lifetime throughout the world, and the grill really is tops.
Yeah. And then how does a place like that compare to, the Attic or even Harper's later on the road? Was it the same kind of vibe? Were they a little different in certain
No, it's
aspects? Was the
totally
food
different.
good in both of them?
Well, yeah, my father would kill me if I said no. The food was comparable. The food was always good because that's a part of entertaining, of course. But the times were different. So as you go, as the times elevate, things change. I think uh, when he get the Crawford Grill is just really very soulful jazz. People coming because they love jazz. They're very reverent toward jazz. They took it very seriously. They dressed up to the nines, that sort of thing. When we get to Walt Harper's Attic, after he has pianist at the Grill, it's different. It's late '60s, and everybody's peace and love period. Everybody's coming together, and it was a different sentiment in that way. But the attic was always packed. People loved the music. The music was still the same, jazz, but I think prior to that, in the '50s, '40s, '50s, the jazz scene was a little bit more intense.
Hmm.
Yeah, because it was developing.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yes. Yeah.
So going from there, I mean, how would you describe your father's music? I just talked to George Benson, and he's been described from everything as, R&B to jazz to pop to soft rock. Would you say your father was jazz specifically, or did he kind of delve into other areas or realms, or is there a label you can put on it at all?
I would say that my father was what you call mainstream jazz.
Mhm.
You know, instantly recognizable jazz that people really loved. He did not veer off into any bop realms, or third string music or anything like that.
Mhm.
He was more a mainstream jazz artist. That's
Yeah.
what
What do you
jazz.
think, if there was one song or maybe an album that you think really defines who your father was as either a musician or just as a person or a soul, is there a song or album that comes into mind that you think, he would say is pretty representative of who he is?
Well, from early on and throughout his life, even though he eventually wrote his own music and recorded his own music, he was sort of identified with Satin Doll, the tune Satin Doll, which is by Duke Ellington, and Billy Strayhorn, who's another Pittsburgh
Okay.
person, Pittsburgh pianist and arranger. Billy Strayhorn was Duke Ellington's arranger, but he played Satin Doll all the time in his shows, and people expected it of him,
Yeah.
and it's on a lot of his CDs. So I would say Satin Doll.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So is there a piece of advice he ever gave you that kind of stuck with you?
Well, I think you asked me that before, and I mentioned that my dad was not really an advice giver per se. He
Mhm.
was more of an observer, and he'd be checking me out to make sure that I'm doing all the right things. He had a say or two about a fella here and there that I'm he could be demanding in that way, but he we had a meeting of the minds in those situations. He used to say, he had the saying that all that glitters is not gold.
Mhm.
And I have found that to be true, throughout my lifetime. But no, he wasn't a bossy dad. He was a fun dad, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Um, and we did a lot of things together. But music was the thing that we both loved together, was our music.
Yeah. That's
Jazz.
fantastic.
He passed that on to me, so to speak,
Yeah.
the love of jazz, because I was born into it.
Hmm. So is there something, I mean, obviously with his music career, and then that turned into a bit of a business career, do you think there was something else? Did the business side of him that I assume he got maybe from his parents, that led to opening those jazz clubs? Was that because he was into music, or was he kind of passionate about business? Was there something else you could have seen him doing if he didn't make it in music?
Well, his dad was a born businessman. My grandfather was a contractor. He started out as a young man as a carpenter, and he built that into a contracting business, which was very successful. Unusual for a black man at that time, but he did very well in that, building houses all over the town, all over Pittsburgh and outside of Pittsburgh. So my dad had those business instincts, and he grew up seeing that in his dad. But Daddy was just naturally a businessman. He was at the helm of everything that he did. He delegated authority very well. You could be working for my dad and not realizing that you were working for him. Yeah. He was just that good. And he knew how to make money. He knew how to draw crowds. He knew what people liked, and he knew how to entertain. And before the grill and before Walt Harper's Attic, he had started what was called Walt Harper's workshops. And even with the workshops back in the 50s, he was bringing in big names into Pittsburgh at that time. His contacts, Dave Brubeck, just really big names. Mm-hmm. That he knew, that he had met when he was on the road, that were part of his entourage, so to speak. And he booked them into the Hilton Hotel downtown Pittsburgh, and he had these Walt Harper workshops, which were tremendously successful. So he started at such a young age with good business instincts in music.
Yeah.
And everybody knew that about him. I mean, he was really a rainmaker in that effect, in terms of drawing and knowing what to do business-wise.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So Sharynn, before I let you go, I know you have a project coming out called Jazz Splash, I believe. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, or anything else you might have going on?
Well, I've been working on Jazz Splash. It must have been something in the water for quite some time, because there's so many brilliant, great jazz geniuses who come out of Pittsburgh. But it's not like that now. That era is sort of past. Mm-hmm. So the Jazz Splash has sort of gone through, it's in another iteration now. It's geared more toward children. I'm sort of making it a fun project, book, documentary, because I don't want the younger generation to forget from where they came from and what was there. There's still great artists coming out of Pittsburgh, but it's not like they were coming out en masse early on, back in the 40s and 50s, just one right after the next.
Right.
So I'm working on that and putting the finishing touches on my dad's biography, so that everybody has the whole story of his life.
All right. And tell us where we can find that at.
Well, right now, I'll let you know when you can pre-order from the website. Mm-hmm. www.waltharperandallthatjazz.com. It's not ready for pre-order yet, but I'll let everybody know. So all you have to do is go to his website, or my website, which is SharynHarperJazzSplash.com. So everybody can keep up to date with what's going on with my projects that way.
Great. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Nice meeting you. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot, Sharynn.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.